Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II, who will be Pope St. John Paul II in a brief 3 weeks, had a keen personal sense of the tears, the rips, the rifts in the moral fabric of humanity that had been torn in that fabric during the 20th century. All of those terrible things I mentioned at the beginning. He had experienced those tears in the tapestry of humanity himself, especially in the cauldron of the Second World War, which, as I was preparing Witness to Hope, became clear to me, was the formative experience in the life of the man who became the priest, who became the bishop, who became the pope we know as John Paul II. It's very difficult for Americans living on this side of the Atlantic in comparative safety, even during that period, to grasp just how awful the Second World War was in Poland. 20% of Poland's population in 1939, when the war began on September 1st, was dead when the war ended in the spring of 1945. For 5 years, Poland was under a draconian Nazi occupation, which was intended over time to eradicate the Poles as a race. For over 5 years, one of Karol Wojtyła's classmates once said to me, "It was not a question of knowing whether you would be alive at Christmas or Easter or on your next birthday. It was a question of not knowing whether you would be alive tomorrow morning." For several of those dramatic years, young Karol Wojtyła, the laborer who became a clandestine seminarian, walked home from the Solvay chemical factory where he was employed, past the convent at Łagiewniki, where Sister Faustina had died and was buried. Think of that in your mind's eye. Think of this handsome young man dressed in blue jeans and wooden clog shoes, in freezing weather, hungry, alone after the death of his father in February 1941, walking past Faustina's convent, perhaps stopping on his way to the factory or on his way home to pray in the chapel where St. Faustina is now buried. Think of that. Because I think if we remember that, we begin to understand that it eventually came clear to him that here was the answer. Here was the answer to all of the horrors of the 20th century that were being experienced in Krakow. As those horrors were being lived in a very dramatic way in his city, so was the answer to all of that suffering being offered in that city, offered in the experience of the divine mercy.